Anyway, to go back to what I was going to say. It's a great pleasure to take part in this mostly extraordinarily high-quality debate and its fine level of forensic scrutiny, most notably the tour de force from the noble Lord Forsyth of Drumleen, who's not currently in his place. And I would also applaud the contribution of the noble Lord Seeker, who rightly labelled this as a Johnson tax, with the poorest hit hardest. And I'm going to circle back at the end to the reasons why I think that's a particularly accurate label. But I think we have to look at what's happening here in this debate. We have a huge democratic deficit. We, your Lordship's House, has torn this plan to shreds. But we can't do anything. Such is the state of our antique, dysfunctional political system. Boris Johnson won 44% of the vote in 2019, and now he can do what he likes on anything at all, including taxation. The phrase "no taxation without representation" has to come to mind, because the strange thing is, of course, that your Lordship's House is more representative of the country than is the other place. In your Lordship's House, did we have a vote, it would be the crossbenchers, the non-party people, who would have the deciding votes. Now, I think it's worth thinking about what the word social care actually means. I don't think anyone that I've been able to hear anyway has really defined this and looked at what the detail means. We tend to talk in the abstract. So I decided to look at Scotland's definition, where, of course, social care, in a far more democratic political system, is free.
Well, not entirely.
A lot freer than it is here. What does it cover? Personal hygiene, assistance at mealtimes, immobility problems, medication and general well-being. In Wales, also more democratic, there's a cap on how much can be charged weekly for such provision, similarly defined. Now just imagine for a second being in the position of not being able to get or afford such kind of care, to eat, to bathe, to actually take your medication with confidence you're taking the right pills at the right time. It's really stressful to need that care, and to not be certain that it's available to you is very distressing and indeed, I would suggest, unconscionable. Now, in the course of this debate, I also find myself unable to resist challenging a statement made by the noble Lord Hanson of Kinclair, talking about this is taking money from the productive bit of the economy. Well, I would challenge the noble Lord's definition of productive. A carer ensuring that a frail elderly person is able to feed themselves. An assistant enabling a profoundly disabled young person to live a full life. That surely is a definition of productive use of the resources of our society. We come back to a really fundamental question. Is the economy there to serve us? Or are we slaves to the economy? Which is where I would disagree with the noble lady Baroness Altman, who suggested that this shouldn't, who's not currently in her place, who suggested that social care shouldn't be a political issue. This is absolutely political. It's about the way people, particularly our most vulnerable people, are able to live in society. Now, I want to address one crucial issue before I get to 3 points about the structure of the bill and the way it works. And here I'm echoing the words of the noble lady Baroness Brinton, who asked the noble Lord the Minister to disavow the claim from the Health Secretary that social care should be provided by families. And I very much hope the noble Lord the Minister will directly address this point and will disavow that comment, because that suggests that the government regards this indeed, as many have suggested from different angles, as a temporary measure, that it plans for the state to eventually step back from any kind of provision for social care at all. Now, we heard from the Right Reverend Prelate that he takes a share, entirely commendably, of the care of his 93-year-old father. But how many families are in a situation to do that? The pension age is rising. Many people who might have provided care for elderly relatives are now in paid employment. They have to be to meet their costs. It's a standard assumption that both members of a couple, where people are in couples, will work. Also, of course, we're sadly seeing the level of disability among middle-aged people rising. There's also the question of space. 1.5 million people who live in social housing are already in overcrowded conditions. What that means is circumstances such as the children sleeping in the living room. Where are you going to put an elderly relative you're caring for? In the bathroom? I very much hope that in addressing this issue, the Noble Lord the Minister will answer the questions at greater length than the introduction of this bill. Now, we've heard some reference from a number of Noble Lords, although most have accepted it as unviable, to the idea of funding social care through individuals paying insurance. But, my Lords, we should regard being a member of a society, what we would hope is a decent, caring society, as being insurance against hard times, against illness, against disability. This is why social care should be available without charge at the point of use to all who need it. Now, I come to address three specific points about the structure of this proposal, this Johnson tax. Who's paying? How is the money being raised? And where is the money going? Now, the Noble Lord, Lord Eatwell, referred to how this is falling, the cost is falling particularly on low-paid workers. And he made some further interesting and disturbing points about the way the government's illustrative analysis seems to put the idea of paying for healthcare linked directly to payment. I want to pick up a couple of groups to see what that actually means. And I will credit the Liberal Democrats in the other place for uncovering the fact that NHS and social care workers will be paying 12% of the £7.4 billion expected to be raised from employees through the tax, £900 million. Now, that doesn't include the self-employed healthcare workers and social care workers. So the real figure is even higher. Call it £1 billion. These are very often low-paid workers, carers and nurses, far too many of whom we regularly hear are dependent on food banks to feed themselves, and they're having money taken from them so that possibly a little bit more money goes into the system. I think I'm going to quote an unusual source for me, Fraser Nelson in The Spectator. This means increasing taxes on the working poor to safeguard the assets of the stonking rich, end quote. What we're seeing, of course, and I think this is something that the public is often not well aware of, because, of course, for many people this is an academic point which will never come into view, is the fact that national insurance employee contribution falls from currently 12% of income to 2% of earnings over £50,270 a year, so that higher earners pay a lower proportion of their earnings in national insurance contributions than lower earners. Of course, national insurance contributions also kick in around £9,500, meaning that even some people too poor to pay income tax are paying into this system. And I think, thinking about our, broadly speaking, young people, the graduates paying back student loans, they will be taxed at 50% on any increase in salary above £27,288. So that's who's paying. How is this being arranged? And I refer back to the excellent speech of the Noble Lord, Lord Forsyth of Drumlene, who spoke about the need to combine income tax and national insurance, of the missed opportunity for a simpler, fairer, flatter tax system. And indeed, the Noble Lord, Lord Naseby, was looking for an alternative solution, while I can point him to the Green Party manifesto of 2019. That goes even further than the Noble Lord, Lord Forsyth. It merges employees' national insurance, capital gains tax, inheritance tax, dividend tax and income tax into a single consolidated income tax. All income is treated the same way for tax purposes. This ends the injustice of people who work for their income being taxed more lightly than those whose income is derived from wealth, very frequently arrived at by accident of birth or blind luck. I will also note that manifesto provides free social care to the over 65s. And where finally I get to the point about where the money's going, and this picks up points made by the Noble Lord Seeker. A large amount of this money is going into a privatised, financialised sector. Large chains of care homes with hedge fund owners taking returns of 12% or more a year out of the provision of care for our most vulnerable citizens. Now, I would very much enjoyed and commend the contribution of the Noble Lord Griffiths of Runnery Point, who talked about the commendable work of the MHA and gave us an insight into just how difficult that work has been in particularly the last couple of years. And we also heard about the excellent work the MHA is doing in terms of music therapy. That's where all of the funds they're getting are going towards providing care. Think about what happens if you scoop 12% or more financial returns out and then still try to meet the basic needs of residents, because that's certainly all you're going to be able to do. And, of course, that's kind of academic because, as many Noble Lords have said, this is talked about being for social care, but the money for the next foreseeable time is going into the NHS. And, of course, with one more executive power gap, from 2025, the Chancellor is going to decide what happens then. It's often suggested that there should be a truth in advertising rule for government policy, which, if we were to see that, we might see a total gridlock of government, one to rival the chaos in our supply chains, as opposed to the tangle of unpublished strategies, undeliverable targets, and fantasy announcements that we have now. And were the Trading Standards Authority and the Advertising Standards Authority to be asked to cover the announcements of government, well, I think their websites would go down in seconds. This is billed as a health and social care levy. It's clearly nothing of the sort. It does nothing to fix the enormous financial and structural issues in our care system. It leaves underpaid, overstressed workers seeking to care for underserved, neglected patients, while private profits are scooped out of the system. And it doesn't even do more than do sticking plasters across some of the gaping gaps in our NHS. So I conclude by referring back to that term, the Johnson tax. It is misleading in its claims, it's fragile in its structure, and it doesn't create any kind of solid framework for the future. I can't help thinking of the London Garden Bridge, the Irish Sea Bridge, the Boris buses, the so-called Emirates airline. It's misbegotten, unreliable, and fundamentally unsound.
My Lords, I would like to